Welcome to Teachsimple podcast. We focus on providing simple solutions in the classroom. I have the amazing Shirley Becker. She is, oh my gosh, like this is going to be my I'm messing up my words right now. This is going to be my most viewed podcast right now. I have a scientist, a former teacher, international, pioneer. She is a graduate entry medical student at Cambridge University. From Enfield, you're from Enfield, England, correct?
Correct.
Great. I'm in the UK. She used to be a teacher at Lee Valley High School for 1 year. She also has some economics. She worked in risk management and helped with that at Tide. She was a financial advisor, worked in the lab like me. You are a definition of a Renaissance lady. Welcome to the podcast. How you doing?
Thank you so much. Thank you for the lovely introduction. I'm doing great. I'm really excited to be here today and to talk a little bit about science with you. So I'm pumped.
Let's get it. Man. Did you like the introduction? Because I really had to make sure I set you up right.
I wish I had a recording myself of the snippet and just replay it every morning as my alarm. That was really lovely.
Excellent. Thank you. I appreciate it. So again, Teachsimple podcast. We're trying to provide simple solutions for teachers, but also educators. And we know during this pandemic, parents became educators, right? They had to literally, do homeschooling within a matter of weeks. And it was a disaster, right? It was a lot of kids struggle with that. A lot of parents struggle with that. And another dynamic I learned about this year is that there is a huge conflict with pop culture or just regular human culture and science, right? So let's talk about how we met, right? So we met at Clubhouse. We didn't actually talk, but I was in a conversation, and the title of the conversation was, I believe, are Black people going to get it? I don't know if I was...
Yeah, something like Black people, are we going to get the vaccine?
Right. And it was a plethora of intellects, scholars, thought-provokers, but most importantly, it was a lot of healthcare professionals. And you are a healthcare professional, and you were giving your 2 cents. You want to maybe just kind of talk about the conversation real quick?
Yes, so I entered the room on Clubhouse, and as we said, the title was about Black people and their opinions on the vaccine. And I actually entered the room, obviously, as someone who's been studying science for a really long time, feeling as though my mind might be confined to sciences only, and there might be voices and opinions that I haven't considered.
Yeah.
And upon entering the room, I really saw that there were two camps: people who were scientists, who were healthcare professionals, and who were kind of pro-vaccine. And then the other side wasn't so much what I expected, which were people who were hesitant and had questions, but instead it was people who very much were against the idea of vaccine and somewhat against the idea of science and medicine. And for me, that was immediately concerning, because I saw that in a lot of their thoughts and ideologies, although I feel it was valid to have concerns, some of those concerns came from incorrect information or misinterpreted information. And that's sort of how I became passionate about contributing my own knowledge to the conversation.
Man, and you broke it down, sis. I must say, you broke it down. And then real quick, let me teach you the affirmations. So I do this with my students. So we got 3 affirmations in Miss Anella's class. You can do a snap.
Yeah.
So, that's like a poetry snap. I don't know if you've ever been to like an open mic or whatever. Mm-hmm. You can do it like a nice little golf clap. So it's or you can raise the roof. And to raise the roof is like, oh man, you said something that was really thought-provoking, something that was really amazing. So
I love that.
Do whatever you want, but you'll see me doing those things. So just so you know.
Okay, thank you. Thanks.
So let's talk about it, right? So as a teacher, I feel that you automatically have to be passionate, right? Because you're not getting paid enough, right? Cool. But that passion is really, that's how your kids learn, because you love what you are teaching them, right? Absolutely. When you was a kid, you was like, man, I can't wait till I get this knowledge, give it to somebody else, and just see how they respond to it.
Absolutely.
So where did your passion for science come from growing up? Was it an educator? Was it a phenomenon that happened? For me, It was me seeing 3 shooting stars. I saw 3 shooting stars in a matter of 10 minutes. The Milky Way, all glossed over. That's what inspired me to go into physics. What about you?
Wow, I feel that so many people have such beautiful stories in terms of how they got into sciences. For me, it was actually having a phenomenal teacher myself, who was just so able to break down concepts and make science make sense, that I just fell in love with the sense that science made. I feel that his passion for teaching and the way he was able to teach us also meant that science became one of my best subjects. And so choosing to go down the science route was a combination of where my interests now lie, what makes the most sense, and also just what am I good at. So that teacher being such an inspiration for the trajectory my life then took, also was in part the reason that I later on in life decided to become a teacher myself, because I wanted to have that influence on other students. Okay, so we'll start again from where I picked off. So yeah, this is my absolute favorite teacher, and I've never forgotten him, Martin Cassidy. Until this day, even though he was my teacher maybe over 10 years ago now, I message and email him to update him on my life, because I genuinely feel that the trajectory my life took, I owe to him. And so every step of the way, I'm just like, I'm a teacher now, I'm a medical student now, and it's because of you. So props to Martin Cassidy.
Mr. Is Cassidy?
He definitely deserves it, Mr. Cassidy.
Let's get it, Mr. Cassidy. So what happened after Mr. Cassidy's class? So was that like a junior, senior level class? So talk about that process from high school to Cambridge and science. Like, what was it like being a young Black professional in STEM?
Mm-hmm.
And what was your was it so for me it was physics. Yeah. Was it biology, chemistry? Was it like, what was your niche? And kind of like talk about that process through Cambridge.
Yeah, so Mr. Cassidy was actually my biology teacher. And biology didn't actually end up being my favorite subject. But one thing I really took away from his class was his method in approaching science and his method in approaching exams surrounding science. And I kind of applied this method to my other science classes, to my maths class, and sort of all the subjects that are slightly related. But it was actually chemistry that I absolutely fell in love with. I can't even begin to explain what it is. For me, chemistry just makes beautiful sense. And when you're able to explain concepts within chemistry, because it's one of the subjects that people find difficult, but when you're able to really understand it and make it really simple and explain it to people, I just think it's a beautiful subject. And so chemistry kind of became my passion. So in the UK, when you're 16, you take exams, but at this time, you're not a specialist in any sense. So you take an exam in pretty much every single subject there is. And then you refine your subjects down to 4. And at this point, I chose all of the sciences, so biology, chemistry, physics, maths. And I sat exams again when I was 18. And these are the exams that you take to go to university. When it came to my school is actually not one of the best performing schools at all. So Enfield in of itself isn't an area that has the best schools in England by any means at all. And my school ranked number 17 out of 18 possible schools in all of Enfield. And so when it came to sending people off to university, my school had a really good record for sending people to university in general, but not a very good record for sending people to the best institutions. In the UK, there are kind of 2 that top the league table: the University of Oxford and the University of Cambridge. And I was interested in going to Cambridge. And this is kind of a whole story in of itself, which I can address. Oh. So essentially, University of Cambridge at my school wasn't really a university that people often aim to go to, because again, it was just not within our culture to aim for elite institutions. But my school did take us on a trip to Cambridge, and we walked around, and the buildings themselves are kind of mesmerizing, and you kind of know that this is kind of the big deal, right? But one teacher turned around to me and said, if you really want to aim for this. And then I kind of had a very naive mind at the time. I just thought, okay, the teacher's telling me this is the best, so I'll go here, I guess. Like, I had no concept of what it meant to go to somewhere like Cambridge at the time. But from that moment on, which happened when I was 14, so 4 years away from the point where I actually have to make a decision, I had already decided that I was going to go to Cambridge. And I actually feel that the naivety and not having all of the worries and concerns prevalent in my mind helped me to just go for it, because I wasn't scared, I wasn't fearful, I didn't have an idea or a concept that this was unachievable, because I was simply just so naive. which meant that I wasn't scared to put in an application. I wasn't scared to get interviewed. And I didn't at any point think that I was incapable of achieving the correct grades. So I actually thank my naivety at the time for giving me sort of the courage to apply for an institution like this.
What are your parents like?
What are my parents like? So my parents both were born in Ghana, and they both kind of had the American dream, which is prevalent in a lot of countries in Africa, where they kind of feel that moving to Europe allows better life chances for you and better life chances for your children. So they both had the mentality that I will move to Europe before I have children, and my children will have an easier life than I will ever have. So they moved at the age of 21 without money, without a jacket, because they didn't know that outside of Africa it's really cold, and one pair of shoes. And they kind of made a life for themselves here. And I suppose they still carry that mentality of my children will at all costs have a better life than I had. So for them, the number one thing is education. They're really big on sending all of their kids to schools and doing everything that they can so that the only concern in our lives is school. They don't want us to worry about what we're going to eat, what clothes we have. They just want to make our life as good as possible around school, so that the only stress in our lives is school. And that's the only thing we need to think about. So both my parents are pretty much like, please just do good in school, please just do good in school, but they don't themselves have a really good concept of what exams you really do at school, what doing well at school looks like, or what it takes, because they didn't have the opportunity to go through school in the same way that I did. But they know that Europe, good schools, please do well, because I came to Europe for this. So
you say your parents, right? They didn't have professional training, but they had self-determination, right?
100%.
Right. So that's just something as Black people of the African diaspora, that's just what we have inherently because of our oppression, because of our exploitation. No matter what they try to do, no matter what they try to do with our minds, our self-determination is what fuels our motivation and our aspirations and everything else. And I say that to say because during the, like right when the Emancipation Proclamation happened, you know, it was illegal for slaves to read, right?
Yeah.
So there's this book called Black Educations in the South by Dr. James Anderson from 1865 to 1935. Okay. And essentially what the book talks about is how pretty much Black people started public education in America, and how their self-determination is what perpetuated public schooling system in the South. So for example, and then I'm gonna get to talking about your passion. So for example, right when slavery ended, it took them 7 years to teach themselves how to read, how to write. Within that 7 years, that was the greatest acquisition of literacy. They built schools, Black people. They built churches. They had a large teaching force. They literally, with that self-determination, pretty much started their own school system after slavery ended.
And flipped it all around in 7 years, essentially.
Yep. In 7 years. 7 years. And slavery was a long time.
Yeah.
But because they were so, it was pushed down on them so much, they always wanted it. And I just want to say that you are everything your father dreamed of. Just from me meeting you, you are definitely doing what your dad dreamed of, and he's very proud of you for sure.
Thank you so much. That's really nice. That's really nice of you to say. I appreciate that.
So what's your passion? Like, what are you passionate about, and how does science connect with that?
Okay, so what my passions are currently, actually, well, obviously I'm studying medicine. So everyone who studies medicine, someone has a passion for contributing to the healthcare of others. Specifically within medicine, I'm actually really passionate about OBGYN related things. And I think that I would really love to see a change in the way that women's healthcare and women's sexual health, fertility is addressed from a much younger age, because I kind of have this idea that women, especially in the 21st century, build themselves to be everything that they feel they need to be before they can be a parent, right? They go through education, they get the best job, they get a promotion, they get a husband, they get a home, and then they start trying to have a family. And for some women, unfortunately, it's only at that point, once they've done and contributed their entire life to that endeavor, that they then find out that there are complications associated with having a family. And it might be particularly difficult for them. And I think this can be so life-shattering for some women. And I'm just very interested in the extent to which we can address fertility and investigate fertility, especially preventative things when it comes to fertility issues at a younger age, such that a woman is able to implement these ideas into her life before she contributes her entire life to having a family, and finding out then at that point that she can't, or finding out at that point that maybe she should have had a different lifestyle in terms of, I don't know, smoking or diet, that would have made it easier to have a family. So that's kind of what I'm interested in. And then also complicated pregnancies, because they're much more prevalent than I think a lot of people imagine. So things like miscarriages. And I think by not talking about them at all, every woman that kind of undergoes these things has the potential to feel so alone, and then kind of think about how maybe it's their fault, or how could this happen to me, and I see everyone else with a baby. And then to find out that actually it's a large percentage of women that will undergo a miscarriage at some point in their life, but how are you to know if these aren't very transparent conversations, or these aren't things that, you know, when you're taught this is how people have sex, you're also taught, oh, by the way, when people have sex, these things can happen and these complications can occur. Because if everyone kind of has the idea that they are common and they're normal, then I think it can evoke a very big difference on the mental health issues that might be linked to people that experience these things. Because, you know, our experiences are just what we think is normal and what we think is abnormal. And the more we think something is abnormal and only happening to us, the more of a tendency it might have to impact us negatively. So that's my specific passion within medicine.
And we need that education to distinguish between the normal and the abnormal.
Absolutely.
Wow. So that's another podcast. I would love to really dig deeper into what you just said, because there are a lot of people, including myself, that can definitely, we need that education so we can deal with that plight.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. So now let's talk about, so COVID-19, right? So COVID-19 was heavily politicized in America. I don't know how it was for you in the UK. Mm-hmm. We were going, so literally when it started, everybody was kind of on the same page, and the cases were really, you know, reasonable.
Yeah, in comparison to what they are now.
Right. And politics, misinformation, disrespect for education, science. One thing I would say about that Clubhouse group is that there was a lot of disrespect on people that had degrees. And I just want to say that your work is appreciated. And I'm so sorry that that dynamic was present there. There are a lot of, she said, quote unquote, hood degrees there, you know? And it's just so sad that excuse my language, that shit perpetuates just the audacity of people to feel like they know what the hell they talk about, and they don't. And it's literally killing people.
It's a really tricky situation. I think there was a lot of people that felt that just because we don't have degrees doesn't mean that we shouldn't have a voice, or we shouldn't be able to contribute to a conversation. And I absolutely agree with that. I don't think that a specific degree in a specialism means that your voice is superior than that of others. I agree that I absolutely do not support the disrespect that meant that some of us who did have degrees had. I think, I think a lot of the tension just arose from this assumption that the other people felt that we automatically thought we were better than them just because we had degrees. And really the only thing we wanted to do was to share the things that we did learn throughout our degree, just to be able to kind of minimize the amount of concern or validate or invalidate some of the concerns.
So what are some myths and facts can you give about COVID-19 and the vaccine for the people in Detroit, so they can take that information and
Yeah.
really, you know, make a really responsible decision.
Right. So I think one of the biggest myths that I took away from just the Clubhouse conversation itself um, isn't necessarily a myth in that it holds no substance at all. It's that what people think about this idea that I'm going to speak about, the specific thing they think about this is kind of warped. So this idea that the vaccine's aim is to deliver a message to the body, and this message is kind of programming the body to do something that it doesn't naturally do. And I think this is kind of the biggest misconception that I took away from the Clubhouse conversation. And I think it stemmed from the fact that a lot of people know, obviously, the vaccine that Pfizer created and AstraZeneca, I believe, as well, contains something called mRNA. And this stands for messenger RNA. And for people, they think, wow, messenger RNA, a message is entering the body. The body is getting instructions of what to do, and they can code anything and get the body to do absolutely anything it wants and manipulate us and so on and so forth. Yes, mRNA does deliver some sort of message to the body, but the message that mRNA delivers to the body is very specific, and it delivers, but the message that this mRNA delivers to the body is essentially to make a protein in the absence of the virus, so not the virus itself, just one component of the virus, which is a protein that won't harm you if the virus itself is not there, in order for the body to be able to recognize that as foreign and build a specific immune response to that protein, such that if it ever encounters that protein again, for example, when you really do become infected by the virus, it already has cells ready to destroy it. Because for every disease that we get infected with, our body actually mounts an immune response that's specific for that disease. Right. So when you get the chicken pox, there's a different cell that attacks the chicken pox disease. And when you get HIV, it's a different cell that attacks HIV disease. And right. So what the message in the messenger RNA is essentially make a protein so that you get exposure to the protein without getting exposure to the virus, so that you can have an attack ready if you ever see the virus again.
And he was like, but that protein, what is that protein? We don't know what's in that protein. It might be rats in it. I'm like, bro.
Yeah, so there are definitely no rats in it. But if we talk about what the protein is, so the protein, and again, this will make a lot more sense when I talk just in general about how the vaccine works. Essentially this protein is a cell surface protein, and all that means is it is on the surface, so on the outside of a cell, and the cell that we're talking about is the virus. And this protein is really important for allowing the virus to enter and invade our own human cells, so our healthy cells that we want to protect, right? But this protein can only really work if it has the entire virus to help it, right? But the protein on its own is just a protein that can do nothing because it's not attached to a virus. But that cell surface protein is really important to allow the virus to do what viruses do, which is invade our cells. And so, yes, the messenger RNA will get our body to express that protein for a short period of time, which on its own, it can't do anything, because we know that that protein will also be present if the virus infects you. But then when it tries to, we already have all the cells to destroy it. So that's what the protein is essentially.
Right. Exactly. And we're giving the people a little. Well, go ahead. You're about to go ahead and explain it. So talk about just pretty much how the vaccine works. What are the side effects? What are some worries people are having? Okay, maybe you dispel some of the Bell palsy articles that people have been talking about, and just kind of like give people the facts.
Okay, so I think at this point it'd be a good point to explain how the vaccine works, right? So in order to understand how the vaccine works, I think it's useful to kind of start from what do viruses do, and then we can understand what did we do when it comes to the vaccine and why that makes sense to stop viruses from doing what viruses do. So viruses, this is going to be very similar to my explanation on Clubhouse, but for the sake of your audience who haven't heard it, it should be fine. So viruses don't have any sort of brains, right? They don't think consciously. They don't know what they're doing in life. They're pretty pre-programmed to do one thing and one thing only. And that is to enter our human cells or enter another animal cells, but these are all called hosts. So whoever gets infected with something is called a host because they're hosting a virus, right? So the virus enters a host and it enters our cells. So our entire body is made up of cells and we want to keep them nice and healthy. But the virus enters it. And the reason it needs to enter it is because once it's inside the cell, it's able to duplicate. So one virus becomes 2, 2 become 4, 4 become 8, and so on. And it will do this and do this and do this until there are hundreds and hundreds of cells, viral cells. And then your healthy cell basically explodes, allowing all those hundreds of viruses to find 100 new host cells within your body and do the same thing. So you can see that this quickly becomes a very big problem. After a while, you end up having, where you started with 1, you now have millions and millions of viral cells going around, right? But they're programmed to do this, so they don't think consciously. And in order to do this, they kind of need components to help them do so, because a virus can't just magically enter a cell without having something to help it to do it. And a virus can't just magically duplicate itself without having something that helps it to do it. So the things that help viruses to do these things are proteins, specific proteins that do specific jobs. One of those proteins will be on the outside of the virus, and this will be a protein that allows it to enter our cells. So different viruses do this by different ways, but it kind of tricks the cell to open itself up and allow the virus to come inside. And then the second thing that we spoke about is the duplication of viral cells, right? And in order to do this, either the virus itself will have all of the proteins necessary to kind of copy its genetic material and copy the whole cell and make a new one, or it will hijack our cells, our cell system to duplicate itself, because our cells are also constantly duplicating themselves. That's how we grow, that's how we make new skin. When our skin falls off, that's how we heal, because we're constantly making new cells. Right. So either the virus will have its own machinery to do this, or it will just hijack our machinery, who's conveniently doing it anyway. And then, yeah, we get the duplication, our healthy cell explodes, and then we have lots of viruses that can repeat. Right? So now we kind of understand how what the virus does. We can begin to understand how the vaccine works. So in general, vaccines work by introducing something that looks like a virus or looks like a component of a virus so that you build an immune response towards it, right? In this case, we isolated COVID-19. We looked at COVID-19 and we're like, well, we know exactly how viruses work, but every virus has its own protein. Every virus has its own machinery. We need to know exactly what that machine and protein looks like for COVID-19 so that we can specifically have a vaccine that works for COVID-19, because we can't use the vaccine for chicken pox or something because it won't work for COVID-19 because COVID has its own proteins, right? And it thought, okay, what protein is one of the most important ones that allows COVID-19 to do its job and do what it does? And that protein was the cell surface protein, because this protein is the protein that allows it to enter our cells in the first place, right? So this we know is a very important protein. And what we did is we looked at the code for this protein. And when we talk about coding for our cells, we usually talk about DNA, because all of our genetic material is written in DNA. This DNA that we have actually gets converted into something called mRNA and then gets converted into proteins, right? For viruses, some viruses just skip the whole DNA part and just think, I know that I'm going to change into mRNA anyway, so why don't I just have mRNA so that I don't have to have this whole conversion step? So that's why COVID-19 has mRNA in it. So we looked at the mRNA coding for just the protein, not the whole virus, just the protein. And we took this coding and kind of duplicated it and duplicated it and duplicated it, knowing that if we put that code inside a human cell, the human cell would do what it would do if it had its own natural mRNA that came from our DNA. And that is that it gets another protein that exists in our cells to read this mRNA. And once it reads the mRNA, it creates the protein that the mRNA is instructing it to create. So again, we said the important protein was the one on the outside. We've now taken the mRNA code for this protein, put it inside of a cell, and our human cell says, hey, I see mRNA, no harm here. There's normally mRNA hanging around anyway. Let me read it and make the protein that it's linked to make. So it makes this cell surface protein. And then this is where we get an immune response kicked in. So I just said that we have DNA, gets converted into mRNA, and then it makes proteins. This, in our eyes, it would make the protein that's responsible for our eye color. In our hair, it would make the proteins that's responsible for hair growth, right? So our cells read the mRNA, make the protein, but our body also constantly has other cells going around. And all this other cell does is it binds to all the proteins that are being made just to double check that that protein is supposed to be there. If there's something wrong with that protein, it will destroy it. But also if it's a protein that it knows you were not born with, then it will also destroy it. So we've now made this protein that belongs to COVID-19, and the cells come around and bind to everything, binds to the proteins in your eye, and you're like, yep, that's your eye color, that's supposed to be there. Yep. Binds to the protein of COVID-19 and says, hold up, wait a minute, this is not supposed to be here.
Right.
It then attaches a label to that protein, and that label is essentially, we are gonna kill you.